A very interesting Senate race is unfolding right now in the Beehive State, and by that I mean Utah, for those of you who, like me, don't know random state nicknames. That's where Republican Senator Mike Lee is up for re-election this fall. He's one of the GOP politicians who originally cheered on Donald Trump's fight against the 2020 election results, but ultimately backed off as no evidence was shown of widespread voter fraud. Lee eventually voted to certify election results on January 6th after the Capitol attack. The fact that he's running for re-election, however, isn't the interesting part of this race, but it's who he's running against that is. Remember Evan McMullin? He's a former CIA officer. He ran as an independent candidate for president in 2016, and now he's focusing on his race in his home state. McMullin even convinced Utah Democrats to ditch their own nominee, guys, which is something that is unprecedented, and back him as an independent candidate. The Deseret News writes, quote, "The decision has big implications for Utah's U.S. Senate race. It injects significant momentum into a more moderate, independent movement in Utah politics, and signals Utah Democrats are so eager to up the chances of beating Lee that they're willing to ditch their own candidate." As an independent, McMullin also vows to caucus with neither party, which, again, most independent candidates don't do that, by the way. Simply put, Politico calls this the strangest Senate race in America, adding, quote, "McMullin is making it the most competitive Utah Senate race in perhaps 30 years, which is about as old as I am." And U.S. Senate candidate Evan McMullin joins me now. Evan, good to see you, my friend.
Good to be with you, Shermichael. Thanks for having me on.
So Evan, I mean, this is unprecedented, man. I mean, you got Democrats to drop their own candidate and say, you know what, we're going to join forces with you. I mean, as a long-term political strategist, I'm sure the viewers are wondering, how did you make that happen?
Well, it was a tremendous country over party moment, to be frank. Democratic Party delegates voted to join our campaign rather than nominating their own candidate. And look, I don't view it as, simply that they were, ditching their own candidate, but rather they were joining a coalition of Utahns who are committed to our democracy, who want to get back to a sound functioning system of self-government. And so we made the case that, look, we're either going to, as principled Republicans, Democrats, and independents, we're either going to form a new coalition that can replace Mike Lee and solve problems like inflation, high costs of healthcare, lack of water out here, and air quality issues. We're either going to do that together, or we're going to be steamrolled by Mike Lee in the far right, and that was our decision, and as a state to make. And Utah Democrats put country over party and did that. The United Utah Party here, a small but important third party, voted to do the same thing. And our coalition has been growing ever since.
And Evan, I just want to say for our viewers, it's also important that we note that Evan also has a significant amount of support for disgruntled Republicans, a lot of independent swing voters as well. But Evan, so Mike Lee won the June primary by 62% of the vote. And a head-to-head poll of registered voters, however, showed that you're only trailing Lee by 5 points. I mean, I really want to unpack that a little bit, because you talked a little bit about Democrats, Evan, and I've known you for a very long time, just to let our viewers know for transparency's sake. Talk, Evan, about the importance of sort of building this very disparate coalition of voters who, just to be quite frank, have a lot of different and wide-ranging views on a whole host of political issues. And yet you've been able to pull them together, so much so that you're only trailing a sitting U.S. senator by 5 percentage points, which is, by the way, within the margin of error.
Yeah, well, look, I would say this, Shermichael. We've been sold a real set of lies by a lot of politicians for a long time. We've been told that we have far more in difference than we do in common as Americans, as Utahns, and it just isn't true. Every night I go to gatherings that our supporters put together with their neighbors and friends, and these are gatherings, these are events in our communities here, and Republicans, Democrats, and independents show up knowing that they're going to a political event with members of the opposing party. I mean, where else in America is that happening? Well, the answer is probably nowhere but Utah, but it should be happening everywhere, because the reality is we have far more in common on, first of all, our values, where most Americans, most Utahns are committed to our values that we're created free, that we're created equal. Therefore, we need a system of self-government where we elect our leaders, and when we vote them out, there's a peaceful transfer of power. We agree on that. But what we're also finding is that we also have a lot of common ground on even the most difficult, pressing issues facing the country. And I think the extremes are helping us realize that. The louder the extremes become, the more the rest of us are saying, hey, you know what? We have a lot in common. Let's do some things together so that we don't keep being steamrolled by the extremes. And let's make a better life for ourselves here in Utah and across the country.
I mean, Evan, it certainly appears that way. But Evan, would you say that the popularity that you're seeing, I mean, again, being within 5%, do you think that this is a vote for you because voters like you, they like what you stand for, they like your message? Or do you think it's a combination of that and also voters saying, you know what, we just don't like what we have seen from Mike Lee? I mean, after all, Evan, your campaign has ran some very interesting ads showcasing that Lee hasn't really done very much for the residents of Utah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's a lot of opposition to Senator Lee here. The fact that he's a 12-year incumbent polling only at about 41% support means that he is incredibly vulnerable. Most Utahns want to replace him. And so people are joining our side because of that in part, but also we have a lot of people who just believe that we need an alternative to our broken politics. And they know that that's what I've been campaigning for. They know that I'm committed to our democracy, that I put my life on the line for it and sacrificed again over the last several years to defend and strengthen it. And so people like that too. People want to join that too. And so we know that as we reach every Utahn in the state with our message, that we will win this fight, because we know that when Utahns know who I am and they know who Mike Lee is, they choose to join us rather than him on average. So that's what we're doing here. But we're very optimistic and encouraged by all the support we're receiving.
So Evan, I mean, I want to get into this, and this, I think, is a fair critique, but also a legitimate concern. You're pledging not to caucus with either Democrats or Republicans if elected. How does that benefit people in your state, especially if you risk missing out on key committee posts? Because typically independents will either caucus with Republicans or they'll caucus with Democrats. But you may be the first one to make the decision, you know what, I'm not going to caucus with either side. How do you assure potential voters of yours that you're still going to be able to accomplish things for them?
Well, I'm not going to caucus with either side because I truly want to represent everyone in this coalition. And if I say I'm going to join one side or one party or the other, then the other part of this coalition drops off, and I'm not able to represent Utahns in the way I want to. Look, George Washington said that the spirit of party, he warned, would threaten our country's future. We're living in that reality now. Independence was good enough for him. It's good enough for me. I've worked in Congress. I'm not naive to how it works. And listen, I'll tell you this, and anyone who's concerned about this, we get nothing out of Mike Lee. He is the least productive senator in the chamber. No one ever drafts a bill in the Senate and wonders, what does Mike Lee think about this if it's a serious bill? It just never happens. It just never happens. But meanwhile, the senators who are willing to serve sort of in the middle between the two parties, even if they are registered with one side or caucusing with one side or the other, they are the most influential senators in the chamber. And I would say the most influential people in Washington, period, second to the president. I want that for our coalition of principled Republicans, Democrats, and independents. This is about giving Utah and this coalition, this network that we're building, the most important vote in the Senate. And with that, we will have a tremendous amount of influence to do a lot of good, yes, for Utah, but also for the whole country. That is what the opportunity is here.
Well, I think that's certainly a fair point, Evan, for voters to consider. So, Evan, I want to get into this thing with Mike Lee and this new Twitter account that many people thought was a parody account, and it turns out it is actually Lee's account. It's raising eyebrows with this tweet that says, in part, quote, "bussin' for real, for real." The account has also engaged with you, telling you to stick up to the truth or lawyer up. I got to ask you, what do you make of this, Evan? What's going on in politics today, Evan?
I don't know. Look, I have to say, it's one of the most, I mean, we live in strange times, and this is one of the more bizarre things I've seen in politics. And that's saying a lot, I think, after the last several years. I really don't know. I mean, I think the bigger picture is that Senator Lee knows that he just has failed to live up to the expectations of senatorial service. He's just unable to serve. I mean, he is, like I said, he's the least productive senator in the chamber. He's not able to lead. He's not able to govern. And all he's able to do is vote no and go on cable news. And it's just Utah suffering as a result. And I think he sees movement in the polls as we rise against him and close the gap and soon, I imagine, overtake him. He is getting desperate. I think that's what it comes down to. But this account is bizarre. Senator Lee advised Trump's efforts to overturn the election. He advocated to the White House that they find fake electors from swing states because he thought that would offer the most opportunity for success in overturning our democracy. It is one of the greatest betrayals of our Constitution in the Republic's history. And now he's using his so-called based Mike Lee account to threaten to sue me or something. And I say, bring it on. I'm not going to stop calling him out and holding him accountable for betraying the Constitution. I'm just not going to do it.
Well, Evan, will the real Mike Lee please stand up? My friend,
I think
Evan
we're
McMullin.
seeing the real Mike Lee here. I think we're seeing it, Michael.
Evan McMullin, thanks so much for joining.